Yesterday, we spoke a lot about identifying firearms crimes and criminals and how technology could help you tell the story. However, if you want to know the whole story, you need to have developed the capacity to efficiently and effectively manage all of the information that's available inside and outside a crime gun. I'm speaking about inside information like ballistics, data that transfers to fired ammunition components. I'm talking about on the outside, make, model, and serial numbers, so important to establish the tracing of the transactional history of that firearm. I'm talking about on the outside, fingerprints, DNA, hairs and fibers, trace evidence. You have to be able to manage all of the information on the inside and the outside if you want to know the whole story. Today, your case might be solved using IBIS and ballistics. Tomorrow, your case might be solved on tracing the transactional history of a gun. On the third day, it might be solved through the use of DNA. On the fourth day, you might need all of those leveraged together to solve your case. That's why it's so important to think about how you are going to manage all of this information before you embark on the investigation of firearms crimes. So today's first two speakers, the first speaker and the panel that will follow, will speak to this issue of managing information, all types of information from inside and outside the gun, to be most effective in the investigation of firearm-related crimes. First speaker will be Henrik Larsen of the Danish National Police in Denmark. Henrik is responsible for IBIS operations within the Danish National Police. He has 20 years of experience in firearms examination. He is a member of the IBIN Steering Committee and the European Firearms Experts Group. Henrik.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for this opportunity. Because of the change of the schedule, will give me the opportunity to give my 2.5 hours presentation on how the great Danish Vikings conquered the world. And I'll be doing it in Danish, so you have to put on your headsets. No, just kidding you. My presentation is about the trace evidence protocols for firearms investigations. First, I would like to give you a view of the Danish police. There are 12 regional police forces in Denmark, and on top of that, there's the national police, which covers areas such as intelligence, the anti-terror unit, and the National Investigation Support Center, and of course, the National Center of Forensic Services. The firearms protocol in Denmark prescribes that all firearms in the custody of the police must be submitted to the National Center of Forensic Services. This is not always the case, as you will see in this presentation. They will send in the firearm for ballistic and fingerprint and DNA examination. Fingerprint and DNA are performed if requested. So upon request, swapping for biological material is part of the examination in the firearms unit. These swaps or samples are then sent to the University in Copenhagen for analysis. First, I will give you a little historical background for the DNA in Denmark. It worked. In the beginning of 2000, the section of forensic genetics at the University in Copenhagen was established. We were a little behind the rest of the world because they were doing a lot of testing with that. So we have old cases from 95 or so that are where DNA are being analyzed, but the beginning of the department was in 2000. In 2003, a political decision led to the creation of the National DNA Profile Register. This register only holds criminals and staff working in criminal cases. It was a political decision that not civilians were going into the register. All staff of the police are, of course, registered with a profile, along with the criminals. Criminals and suspects are put into the register in serious offenses, meaning if they are arrested for a minor offense, their DNA profile will be swapped when they're taken into custody, but it will be removed if it's not a serious crime. Samples from the firearms were centralized at one location, and that's the firearm unit. That decision was made in 2004 because we realized that the swaps we took at the firearms units gave a better results than the swaps they did at the university, and I will show you why. This is a statistic showing some of the results from the university. If you see most of it is contact DNA, and of course that gives good results. On things like underwear, you're almost up to 90% of profiles that could be run through the register. If you look at the cartridge cases, that's quite poor. Various evidence has an average of 62% created DNA profile that goes into the register. This includes both swaps from police units and swaps taken in the university lab. If we move on to firearms, this is the results of the swaps that we are doing in the firearms unit. There's an average percentage of 70% created DNA profile. Estimated 15% of these leads to a hit with a personal profile. It's often seen that these samples from firearms consist DNA material from more than one source, so we have a mixed profile. We believe that it's because the firearms are often handled by several or numerous persons. And also when criminals hide their firearms away, they often wrap them in clothing that doesn't belong to themselves, so we get mixed profiles out of that. That leads to contamination, of course. Having said all that about statistics, you have to bear that in mind, said by a very famous English guy. Best practice on DNA swapping. How do we do it and how do we get our successes? The following are some bullet points from our best practice on swapping biological material in firearms. The standard procedure for firearms is of course similar to DNA swapping in general, precautions to avoid contaminations and so on. As you can see on this picture, we use 2 cotton sticks when we swap for DNA. It's because of the QA program in the DNA lab. They will take those 2 cotton swabs and they will run them on two lines simultaneously. The QA program at the university prescribes samples to be ignored if inconsistency between the 2. This use of those 2 cotton sticks has proven to increase the results. What we do when we swap, we add only 1 drop of 0.9% sodium chloride solution to each stick. These samples are then kept in a breathable, sterile and sealed paper bag when they are sent to the DNA lab. What we also figured out was that when the lab personnel at the DNA lab did the swapping, they treated the firearm gently, and that will not give you sufficient biological material. So that's what I mean by saying use force. And the guys that do it in our lab, they really use force. They mess up the cotton sticks. They push it very hard. So it's important to use sufficient amount of force when swapping. It's not necessary to be gentle. The more force, the more result you get. Larger amount of biological evidence are taken off the firearm. It's important that you pick the right spots. Picking the right spot means putting yourself in the place of the shooter or the person who was in possession of the firearm. It's important to know where DNA materials are present. If you're used to handling firearms, you will know by experience. It meaning that you're looking for the checkered areas, the surface where DNA will be stuck on, the sharp edges, and so on. Who do we want to do the swapping then? It's important that personnel who do the sampling of the DNA material must be familiar to the operation of firearms, so they'll be able to do the possible best swapping. They have to know where there are direct contact between the firearm and the shooter, both when firing, but also when handling and operating the firearm. Checkered areas, as I said, sharp edges, and in rifle and shotguns, also the point where the cheek has been in contact. So every point of the firearm where there's been contact between the handler of the firearm and the firearm itself, there's a possibility of finding some DNA material. This guy, I'm sure he's used to handle and operate a firearm, but he's not the kind of person we're looking for. In other cases, we're looking for him, but not for this. What we use is we have trained gunsmiths in our department. They are the ones who get the firearm when they're first submitted to the department. They're used to handling firearms, they're used to firing firearms, so they know all about it. And another thing is, when it's taken from the crime scene or from the shooter or whatever, it's put into a sterile sealed bag. So they will be the first ones to have a hand on it. As I said, it's important to know about firearms is the knowledge of other examination methods. Contamination, of course, and also knowledge and experience to where it's most likely to find useful fingerprints and making sure that these are not compromised. That's another important thing. So when you send it to another examination method after the DNA swapping, you haven't destroyed those leads. Experiences with this DNA swapping. It's my experience that the use of 2 cotton sticks when wiping for DNA makes sure that one will get a lot of material for the use in the later analysis. It can, on the other hand, result in too much material that will result in mixed profiles, which later on will cause problems when you put it into the DNA register. The protocol prescribes that swapping of possible DNA material must be done according to requesting unit's tactical details from the case. If there's no reference to a person in the tactical details, it can make sense to do separate samples from different parts of the firearm in an attempt to avoid mixed profiles, meaning that you will use a cotton swab or a cotton stick for the trigger and one for the hammer and so on. At some point, this success leads to what I refer to as overconsumption, meaning that even in the obvious cases where the firearm was taken from the waistband of the perpetrator, they will send in the firearm for DNA swapping. And I don't mean there's any reason for that. I mean there's no reason for that because it was obvious that he had the gun on him. So we solved cases before DNA, so that's what I mean by overconsumption. I think it's very important that requesting units and departments are advised of the possibilities of the useful results after analysis in order to validate the necessity of the examination. The problem in Denmark is that we have to pay for these DNA analysis in the DNA department. So we have to keep costs down. So we don't want to do not necessarily all the DNA examination that they require. Next thing we've been working on is the DNA from the fired cartridge cases. As you saw on the first slide, DNA swaps from fired cartridge cases is close to 0. In 2010, the Dutchman Patrick Diltjes, hope I pronounced that correctly, from the NFI in Netherlands published an article in the International Journal of Legal Medicine, on extracting DNA materials from fired cartridge cases. The cartridge cases are treated in different solutions in order to extract the DNA material. This method was picked up by the Department of Forensic Medicine at the University of Copenhagen by the end of 2010. Excuse me. I will move on to a case study now. the morning of the 14th April of 2011, two bodies were found in a recreational area in a city called Odense in the center of Denmark. They were found by a paramedic who was walking his dog before he went to work. This should be the first case in Denmark where the new Dutch method was used. This is the crime scene where the victim was found. The two bodies are lying there. The white markings are cartridge cases found at the scene. The murdered couple was a 52-year-old chief surgeon at the local hospital and his 10 years younger wife, who was a CEO of a major Danish furniture company. They were quite wealthy, so suspicion, of course, was that it was a murder with intent to rob. At the scene, we found 32 9mm cartridge cases. The pattern of the entrance wound at the victims showed that they tried to cover each other when they were shot. The male was killed by several shots to the heart region, and the female was also shot, of course, but she was not killed instantly, but she was left there to bleed to death. At a nearby youth club, if you see the path in the top of the picture, it leads to a youth club. At that nearby youth club, they found a wallet belonging to the female with both money and credit cards still in it. At this youth club, they had a surveillance camera overlooking the backside because they had a lot of damage to the buildings done by young people. The recordings from the time around the estimated time of the murder showed a male walking away from the area. He had quite a peculiar way of walking. He was doing like a swing with his knee when he was walking. So we showed the footage from the camera to an anthropologist, and he examined the recordings and took measurements of the person and his way of walking. All the cartridge cases from the scene were sent to the DNA lab for analysis with the new Dutch method. The local police then went on TV with the takings from the surveillance camera, and he was recognized, the guy in the picture, by his ex-wife. She called in and said, "That's my ex-husband, Vincent." He was brought into interrogation, and he was swabbed for DNA, and the sample was sent to comparison with the full profile that was found of one of the cartridge cases from the crime scene. There were no mixed profile, it was one full profile on that cartridge case. He denied everything, of course. When he was taken into the police station, there was a surveillance camera in the police station, and he was filmed walking in there. These takings were compared to the recordings from the youth club, and the anthropologist was able to make a positive identification. At the same time, the Department of Forensic Medicine reported a positive DNA match between the swab from the suspect and the one on the cartridge case from the scene. That led to a house search, of course, of the suspect. When they searched his house, they found this one hidden under the floor. If you look carefully at this, you will see that it is a Heckler & Koch G3 assault rifle. It's converted into 9mm Luger, and that's not something you just do. You need skills to do that. Converted from 7.62 into 9mm. And he used magazines from a British Sten gun. Local police assumed right away that this was the firearm, so they didn't stick to the protocol. So instead of sending it to the firearms unit for examination and swapping for the DNA, they sent it directly to the university DNA lab. Because they thought that the DNA was the most important evidence. Instead of sending it to us so we couldn't swap it for the DNA, fingerprints, and then do the test fire, it delayed the firearms examination with more than 2 weeks. So when we finally got a chance to test the firearm and test fire it and do the comparison, the examination showed major differences in the class characteristics. So we reported back that this is not the firearm. Luckily enough, they were able to keep him in custody because the possession of the firearm, which can give you up to a year of prison in Denmark. When the When they examined the male victim's clothing at the crime scene, they found a lens cap from a very expensive camera in his pocket. And in the days after the murder, before the suspect was arrested, he was offering an expensive camera to people in the criminal society in the surroundings of this recreational area. So he was held in custody, of course. Rumors from the prison where he was kept were telling about a submachine gun that supposedly was thrown into a lake in another police district. This lake was searched by divers from the Naval Special Forces, and they found a submachine gun, a Model 39 Swedish submachine gun. And this time the protocol was followed, and it was sent directly to examination. This was what they found. When we did all the examination and the test fires, we were possible to make a positive identification between the test fires and the cartridge cases found at the scene. If you look carefully at this picture, you see the strap of the firearm has a little, what could appear as a number sign hanging down there. It's not. It's actually a fishing hook. So if we could persuade the local fishermen to use stronger lines, we could have solved this case much faster. Some catch, hey? So to summarize this case, it eventually showed that the murderer was testing this firearm in the woods when he was surprised by the couple that was there for a walk. He believed that they had been taking pictures of him while he was firing the gun, so he wanted the camera from them. They wouldn't give it to him, of course, so he, at some point he fired directly at the doctor who was holding the camera. And from there on, according to himself, he reached the point of no return. So he emptied an entire clip into the victims for the sake of the camera. He was convicted in court with a life sentence, and the combination of ballistic evidence, DNA from fired cartridge cases, and the statement from the anthropologist were the evidence that the jury considered to be the most important. This last is my own statement, saying that it's generally believed that DNA evidence is the most important. I think this case showed that DNA evidence, because they thought it was the most important, delayed the case in some way. That's it. Thank you very much.
Questions for Henrik? You might need this.
Yeah. I think I'm lucky too.
Pardon?
I think I'm lucky. There's no question.
Somebody's got a question. Somebody's got a question out there. No questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, the purpose was to establish that it was in fact the person that was on the movie. So what he do is he's putting it all into a computer program, and he measures the angle of the legs when you're walking, the angle of the all the moving things on the person, and he will be, if he have enough meters that the guy is walking, he will be able to compare them and to make a positive ID on that.
There's a couple of them, actually.
Okay. What do I need this for? Yeah. Yeah.
One comment, one question. The comment is when you swap the gun,
Yeah.
usually we use one single swap to concentrate more. Also, we separate the gun barrel. We swap the barrel tip first because sometimes you can find the place.
Yeah.
The second, we swap the trigger and the grabbing area. You may on the shooter speed.
Yeah.
Then we'll have a general swap for the gun surface. If you use one, two swaps, swap everything,
We will have more mixed profiles, yeah, but they will still be able to calculate a likelihood. We do that if we have no reference to no person. We will do it separately. But if we have reference to persons, they will be able to take his profile out of the mixed profile.
Mixed profiles sometimes very difficult to use.
They can be.
Three mixture, forget about it. Also, a question is, do we do fingerprint? What the sequence we should do? The fingerprint first or DNA? Can you hear it or no? Yeah? Okay. Now, you want me to repeat? Okay. Basically, we swap the weapon, three separate swap. One, the barrel tip, because the execution style, usually you have a blowback, have the blood stain or tissue on the barrel tip. Also, some inside the gun barrel, you can find the victim's DNA. Then when we swap the trigger and the grip area, we can find the suspect's DNA. The third one, we general swap for the weapon, you can get some additional information, intelligence DNA. My question is, the DNA, fingerprint, or test firing, do you have a protocol? Which one you do first? And on top of that, the trace evidence, hair and fibers, are you collect those?
Okay. The first thing will be the swapping for the DNA, and it will be done in the checkered area or not the smooth area, because on the smooth area you have a possibility of finding fingerprints. So we will save them for the fingerprints examination. And after that we do the test fire. But when it's all handled in the same lab, we will be able to do that within a few hours. Okay.
Buenos días, Diana Valleza, Nuevo León, México. Mi pregunta es… Ok. Buenos días, Diana Valleza, Nuevo León, México.
Channel 1?
Yeah, but it's not working. Can you translate it?
No.
Okay.
Andre, can you give us one of these?
Yes.
Ok.
Yes.
Buenos días, Diana Valleza, Nuevo León, México. Mi pregunta es si nos puede hacer favor de darnos una pequeña semblanza de explicación del levantamiento de ADN en casquillos.
Actually, I cannot. I'm not into the technical details about how they do the analysis, but I know that they put them into several solutions, which are mild acids, and these acids, in a process over a long time, will extract the DNA material from the cartridge cases, and then they will analyze that result afterwards. You can look up the article from Patrick Dilges, amongst others, who wrote that article on that. The whole process is described there, and it's in the International Journal of Legal Medicine from 2010.
Ok, gracias.
Okay.
Hi, sir.
Levante.
صباح الخير. في الحقيقة الدكتور هنري الدكتور هنري لي قال إمكانية حصول الDNA من ماسورة السلاح. هل لك أن تشرح لنا كيفية الحصول على الدي ان اي من ماسورة السلاح؟ شكرا.
As Dr. Henry Lee mentioned, you use the cotton swabs in the tip of the barrel, so you will actually just swab it around like you do the rest of the firearm. It's not all the way inside the barrel, it's from the tip of the barrel, where there's been contact with the victim. Okay?
All right, my friend from Qatar, let me answer that. When you fire a firearm, rapid oxidation, you push the bullet out, the barrel getting cold. You soak back some of the material. That's called blowback. So sometimes inside the barrel, you can find tissues and blood. You can collect that before you test firing. You can come to my workshop this afternoon. I can show you a couple example. You can collect from the barrel tip or inside the barrel or the M area. It's very important to find victims, to link the firearm to the victim. Thank you.
Hi, sir. If I understood correctly, in the case study that you presented, you found DNA evidence on the spent cartridges that was found at the scene, right?
Yeah.
Was something different done to do the extraction there, since we know that there's a very little chance of finding DNA evidence on the cartridges? Did you use a different technique or just regular swabbing?
The DNA lab went on the market, so to say, just a month before this accident or incident, and told us that there was a possibility of doing that on spent cartridge cases. So we put them in sealed bag and sent them directly to the DNA lab for doing the bathing method.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Shaq.
Thank you.